He stood there in my mother's old office, his suit tailored with her money, his smile practiced for the cameras. When I asked him why he locked me out of the company she built, he laughed and said, "You're just an ungrateful little girl. This company needs a man to run it now." Ungrateful. After everything he stole. He thought I'd walk away quietly, just like he expected Mom to do before cancer took her. But I didn't inherit her silence. I inherited her fire. And I was about to burn everything he built on her ashes. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of justice and revenge. My name is Celia Marks. I'm 28 years old, and I was supposed to be the next CEO of Maison Iris, a luxury fashion brand my mother started in our garage. She built it with her bare hands and brilliant mind, and as her only daughter, I grew up watching her sketch designs on napkins and work late nights to fulfill orders. When Mom was diagnosed with cancer, everything changed. She remarried too quickly to a man named Gerald Cross, a smooth talker, with a business degree and a charming smile. He comforted her, promised to help, and slowly embedded himself into every part of the company. At first I didn't see it. I was grieving trying to keep Mom's legacy alive. But by the time I realized what he was doing, manipulating the board, forging documents, whispering lies about my emotional instability, it was too late. He pushed me out of the company my mother dreamed of me leading, and when I confronted him, he called me ungrateful. But Gerald had no idea that I'd been quietly collecting receipts. What he didn't know was, I wasn't just my mother's daughter. I was her storm. And storms don't ask for permission. Growing up, I was never just the fashion designer's daughter. I was her shadow, her sponge, her little assistant who ran around organizing buttons and fabric swatches, while other kids played with dolls. My mom, Isabelle Marks, was a force of nature. She had this way of turning every failure into fabric, every insult into inspiration. I used to sit under her cutting table while she worked late at night, her fingers dancing through silk and organza like she was sculpting dreams. "Celia," she'd say, "beauty isn't bought. It's built." And that's what we did. Together. But the world didn't see me. The press called me a trust fund kid, or worse, a wannabe. When I'd present design ideas to investors or clients, they'd ask if I was just filling in for your mother. Some even said right in front of me that I was just lucky to be born into success. Even inside the company, senior staff treated me like a child playing dress-up. I remember showing a full collection I'd developed to our creative director. He smiled and patted my shoulder. "Sweetheart, this business isn't just about sketches." They didn't know that half the collections they praised were mine, had finished at 3 a.m. after my mother fell asleep. She'd always give me credit in private. But in public, she kept me hidden until you're ready, she said. Then cancer came. It was like someone turned down the lights in our world. Mom shrank in front of me. Her voice, once commanding, became faint. And suddenly Gerald Cross appeared. He was perfect. Too perfect. Smooth, confident, helpful. He brought her soup, took her to appointments, and offered to help lighten the load at the company. I wanted to be grateful. I tried to trust him. But something about him felt off. He didn't treat me like a daughter. He treated me like a rival. He'd smile at me during meetings, then challenge every point I made. "Well, I think we need more experienced leadership," he'd suggest, smiling at the board, while lightly placing a hand on my mother's shoulder. I started getting left out of key decisions. Then one day, my security badge stopped working. I thought it was a glitch. I called HR. They said the system had been updated. I called the board assistant. She sounded nervous. "Gerald's handling things now," she said. When I rushed to the office, he met me in the lobby with 2 security guards. "Celia, it's best if you take a break," he said. "You've been under a lot of stress." That's when it hit me. He wasn't just taking care of my mom. He was removing me. But I still had my mother, or so I thought. One night I went to see her. She looked weaker than ever. I brought soup, sat next to her, and finally asked, "Do you want me to step away from the company?" She looked heartbroken. "No, baby," she whispered. "It's always been yours." Then she reached under her pillow and handed me an envelope. Inside were old letters, account passwords, and a handwritten note. "If you ever feel like he's not who he says he is, trust your instincts." Mom passed away a week later. The funeral was elegant, cold, and controlled by Gerald. His eulogy mentioned her vision, brilliance, and legacy, but not once did he mention me. I stood in the back. People offered their condolences, but I felt invisible. Then came the bombshell. 2 weeks after her burial, Gerald held a press conference. He announced a new direction for Maison Iris, streamlining operations focusing on revenue and rebranding for modern audiences. He unveiled a new logo. He even renamed the mainline GC, Essentials. GC, Gerald Cross. My mother's name was nowhere. I locked myself in my apartment for days. Rage and helplessness became my roommates. Friends tried to distract me, but a nothing touched the storm in my chest. How could this man, who wasn't even there during the first 10 years, erase everything she built? And how could the world applaud him for it? But then, I remembered the envelope. I started digging. Quietly, carefully. I searched old company emails, financial reports, backdoor agreements. I looked at board meeting minutes, credit card charges, even travel logs. I took courses in forensic accounting just to understand what I was looking at. And slowly, patterns began to form. There were discrepancies, payments to consultants that didn't exist, luxury expenses filed under client outreach, and worst of all, emails between Gerald and a shell corporation, weeks before my mom signed over temporary control. He'd been planning this from the start. I should have broken down. But instead, I felt clarity. For the first time since my mom died, I wasn't lost. I had a mission. I wouldn't just take him down. I'd make sure the world saw exactly who he was and who I had become, because he wanted to erase me. Now I was going to make myself unforgettable. I didn't wage war with fire and fury. I did it with silence, with spreadsheets, with data. While Gerald stood on stages in custom suits, giving TED-style talks about brand evolution. I sat in the back of public accounting classes. I learned the language of fraud. I made contacts, quiet ones in journalism, legal firms, and among ex-employees who didn't owe him their livelihoods. Most people thought I had disappeared. But I was just getting started. My first move was subtle. I filed a Freedom of Information request to access public business filings under his name and his consultants. What came back was gold. 2 of his so-called vendors shared the same registration address in Nevada. The building didn't even exist. Just a P.O. box. Then I cross-referenced payment trails, business trips, and client meetings. I found that over $3 million had been siphoned out of Maison Iris under strategic partnerships that were, in fact, non-operational. One of those strategic partners, a startup run by his ex-wife's nephew, the man who called me ungrateful, had turned my mother's dream into his private ATM. And yet, that wasn't enough. The board wouldn't listen to allegations. I needed undeniable, indisputable, visual proof. That's when I turned to someone I never thought I'd speak to again, Lydia Morrow. She was the former head of PR for Maison Iris. She had resigned mysteriously a month after Gerald took over, citing irreconcilable values. Back then I thought she'd betrayed us, but now I wondered if she'd been pushed out. I found her working in a bookstore downtown managing events. When I walked in, she froze. Then her expression softened into sadness. "Celia," she said, "I was hoping you'd never need to come find me." We sat down over coffee, and I told her everything. Halfway through, she opened her purse and pulled out a flash drive. "I kept this," she said, "just in case." On it were confidential recordings, audio from boardroom discussions, drafts of press releases that never saw the light of day. And most damning of all, an email chain where Gerald proposed manipulating my mother's public image to justify removing me. He called me unstable, immature, and a liability. That was it. My turning point. I assembled everything into a neat package, a digital dossier that told a clear, irrefutable story. And then I made my boldest move yet. I booked a private appointment with one of the top investigative journalists in New York, Clara Bennett, known for exposing corporate corruption in the fashion world. I didn't come to her begging. I came with evidence, witnesses, recordings, and a narrative that was too good to ignore. I pitched her the story of a daughter fighting to reclaim her mother's legacy from the man who stole it. Clara was hooked. Within 2 weeks, the article hit. Full front-page spread in the Times Business Review titled "Betrayal in Silk: How Gerald Cross Hijacked Maison Iris." It exploded. Fashion blogs picked it up. Former employees came forward. Investors panicked. And then the True moment I never saw coming. Gerald was scheduled to speak at a global fashion conference in Paris, just days after the article dropped. He didn't cancel. He walked on stage like nothing had happened, like he could still spin this. And for the first 5 minutes, he almost had them charming, deflecting, reframing the scandal as a miscommunication and a personal matter. Then the screens behind him lit up with my face. Clara's team had gotten the conference to play a live segment of the exposé. My voice filled the auditorium. "I am Celia Marks. My mother was Isabelle Marks. And the man standing in front of you stole everything she built. But here's what he forgot. Truth doesn't need a suit to be powerful." The room fell silent. Gerald froze. The footage showed documents, recordings, Lydia's testimony. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He was done. Within hours, Maison Iris's board of directors issued a formal statement suspending Gerald Cross and launching a full internal audit. Stockholders threatened legal action. Clients began pulling partnerships. And fashion media anointed me, not him, the rightful heir to the brand. But the twist wasn't over. Later that week, I received a private lettre. No signature. Just a copy of my mother's original will. It had never been filed. The one Gerald submitted gave him temporary proxy over the company, but this one, dated 3 months later, named me as sole successor, with explicit instructions to keep the brand in family hands only. It had been hidden. I hired a legal team immediately. After weeks of digging, we uncovered that Gerald had paid an estate lawyer to delay filing the second will, exploiting a loophole, while my mother was sedated. That was criminal. The trial didn't take long. With evidence stacked against him and public pressure mounting, Gerald pled guilty to financial fraud, forgery, and obstruction. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, his assets seized to pay back the company. I didn't go to the sentencing. Instead, I stood in my mother's old studio, now restored, and opened the first official board meeting with me as CEO. On the wall behind me, I hung a single-framed quote in gold lettering. "Ungrateful little girl, watch me. Power doesn't always come with a crown. Sometimes it arrives in the form of humiliation so raw, it strips you to bone and leaves nothing but fire behind." The days following the exposé were supposed to feel like victory. That's what I told myself as reporters swarmed the street outside my apartment. Headlines screamed my name, and social media dubbed me the Phoenix Heiress. They called it a comeback, a triumph, a reckoning. But inside, I was breaking, because he almost won, and because the world still didn't see what it cost me to fight. You see, while Gerald was unraveling publicly, privately, he was still playing dirty. His lawyers launched a smear campaign, suggesting I doctored the documents. They fed tabloids old photos from my college days, nights I didn't even remember spun into stories of erratic behavior. Anonymous sources appeared on podcasts, questioning my mental health, my qualifications, even accusing me of forging my mother's signature. I received death threats. People vandalized the Maison Iris flagship store with red spray paint. Fraud. And then came the moment that nearly broke me completely. I was invited to appear on a morning news show. It was supposed to be my moment to clear the air to tell my side. But halfway through the interview, the host leaned forward and asked Celia with all due respect, "Do you ever wonder if maybe your mother didn't leave the company to you for a reason?" My ears rang. I stared at her, the studio lights blinding. I smiled through clenched teeth, kept my composure. But inside, something cracked. It was like watching the world take a hammer to my mother's memory, to everything I'd endured, and blame me for the damage he caused. I left the studio in silence. No one said a word in the car ride home. My assistant offered tea. I waved her off. My phone buzzed non-stop. I turned it off. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and sank to the floor, in the dark. And I screamed. For the first time since the day I found my mother's final note, I let it out. The pain, the rage, the betrayal. The fact that I had to prove I belonged in a company I was literally born into. The fact that even after exposing a criminal, I was still being treated like a threat. Not a leader, not a daughter, avenging her mother. Just a problem. I cried until my body went numb. And in that silence, I heard her voice. Not a hallucination. Not a memory. Just her tone in my bones. They don't have to see you. You see you. That's enough to begin. It hit me like lightning. I had spent my whole life trying to earn something that was already mine. The validation, the acknowledgement, the permission to lead. I kept waiting for someone to hand it to me, my mother, the board, the press, the world. But they never would, because the world only respects what you own, without apology. And that night on the cold floor of my apartment, I made a decision. I wouldn't just rebuild Maison Iris. I would rebuild myself. In my terms. Loud, unapologetic, untouchable. But first, I had to confront the last ghost holding me back. Gerald. His sentencing was scheduled for the next morning. I hadn't planned to attend. I didn't need to see him caged to feel closure. But suddenly, I needed him to see me. Not the girl he mocked. Not the obstacle he erased. The woman he couldn't destroy. So, I went. The courtroom was packed press employees, former investors. Gerald sat stiff in a dark suit flanked by lawyers, pale but composed. When the judge asked if the victim wished to make a statement, all eyes turned to me. I stood. Slowly. Calmly. And I walked to the front, turned to face the man who had stolen everything and tried to leave me with nothing. "You called me ungrateful," I began. My voice was steady. "You stood in my mother's office and acted like this empire was yours to command. You treated her legacy like a business deal, her illness like a window of opportunity. And you treated me like a threat, not because I was weak, but because you knew I saw you. You didn't just steal money. You stole time, dignity, trust. You manipulated a woman in pain and tried to silence her daughter. But you failed. You see me now, Gerald." He didn't blink, didn't speak. But his eyes, those smug, calculating eyes, lowered. That was enough. After the sentencing, as reporters swarmed outside, I walked past them all. No cameras, no interviews, just me, breathing. That night I went to my mother's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought no flowers, just a folded note. I placed it beneath her name and whispered, "You were right, Mom. Beauty isn't bought, and neither is legacy. I found mine, and I made sure he can't steal it again." I walked away under the moonlight, my steps quiet but certain. Because sometimes the most powerful moment in any story isn't the revenge. It's the moment you decide you'll never be powerless again. And from that moment on, I didn't just carry her fire. I became it. After the trial, the world expected me to celebrate. I had done what very few ever could. I had exposed a fraud, reclaimed my inheritance, and dismantled a man who built his empire on stolen dreams. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like everything that had driven me. The rage, the need for justice, the ghost of my mother's voice had quieted. For the first time in years, my days weren't filled with strategies or legal battles. There were no more headlines to read, no more late-night evidence hunts, no more secrets to unravel. And with the silence came the questions. Who was I without the war? For weeks, I avoided the office. I let the interim team handle Maison Iris's day-to-day operations, while I retreated to the cottage my mother once escaped to during her early design days, tucked into the hills of upstate New York. It was a modest place, stone walls, ivy-covered windows, and the faint scent of cedar always lingering in the air. There, I tried to remember who I was before the fight. I painted for the first time in years. I reread my mother's old design journals. I cooked badly. I cried a lot. But mostly, I sat in silence, letting the layers peel away grief, pride, vengeance, exhaustion, until only the raw, unadorned version of myself remained. It was during one of these quiet mornings, as I sat on the porch with a cup of black tea, that Lydia arrived. She hadn't warned me, just pulled up in an old Honda, stepped out with her usual quiet grace, and gave me a look that said we need to talk. We didn't speak right away. She made her own cup of tea, settled beside me on the porch swing, and just sat. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. After a while, she said, "You know, your mom came here once after her first investor backed out. Said she thought she'd lost everything. But she told me something I never forgot. If all I have left is my name and my daughter's hand, I'll rebuild from scratch." I looked at her, my voice quiet. I don't know who I am without the anger." Lydia nodded. "You're not supposed to. That anger served you. It protected you. But it's not meant to stay forever." We sat in silence again. Then she pulled out a folder and placed it in my lap. "What's this?" I asked. "A proposal," she said. "Maison Iris is stable now. The board wants you back, but on your terms. They'll give you full creative control, a clean slate. But more than that, they want you not your mother's shadow." Inside was everything I'd always dreamed of: an open canvas, full authority, a chance to lead the brand, not as a legacy figurehead, but as myself. I stared at the papers, heart pounding. Lydia stood, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "You already proved who Gerald was. Now it's time to show the world who you are." That night I sat by the fireplace, the flames dancing like memories. I thought about every version of myself: the girl under the cutting table, the grieving daughter, the outcast, the hunter fan, and I saw them all not as contradictions, but as layers. They hadn't broken me. They'd built me. I realized I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted vision. So I made my choice. A month later, I returned to the Maison Iris headquarters, not as a broken daughter reclaiming scraps, but as the visionary behind the rebirth. I launched a new collection titled Rewritten. Each piece paid tribute to a chapter of pain and resilience. Raw edges, unfinished hems, layered silks that told the story of becoming. The show wasn't held in Paris or Milan, but in the very garage where my mother had made her first dress. Press influencers and industry giants all sat shoulder to shoulder as the lights dimmed and my voice played through the speakers. This isn't a comeback. It's a reintroduction. You've heard who they said I was. Now let me show you who I've always been. As the final model walked, the audience stood in silence, then erupted into applause. But for me, the real moment happened offstage. In the corner of the room, a young intern stood crying. She approached me, trembling. I'm the first in my family to study fashion. I didn't think people like me could ever belong in this world. But watching what you did, I know I can." I hugged her, tightly. And in that moment I knew this was it. My mother's legacy wasn't just about fabric or profit. It was about empowerment. And now it lived in me, not through revenge, but through purpose. I didn't win because I destroyed him. I won because I found the courage to build something no one could ever steal again: my self-worth. And from that day forward, I no longer lived in my mother's shadow. I stood in her light. The relaunch of Maison Iris, under my creative direction, didn't just shake the industry, it shattered it. I didn't tiptoe back into the fashion world. I stormed in. The first campaign under my leadership, titled Legacy Unbroken, featured women of all backgrounds, real stories, real scars, real strength. The narrative wasn't about wealth or glamour. It was about resilience, about reclamation, about what it meant to rise from ruin with grace and fury. Sales tripled in the first quarter. Social media exploded. Major retailers begged for partnerships. And for the first time in the brand's history, we opened a scholarship fund for young women in design, named after my mother, Isabelle Marks. But the sweetest justice, it came when the very people who had once dismissed me had no choice but to applaud. Board members who sided with Gerald sent congratulatory emails, which I deleted without reading. The creative director, who once told me I was just a girl with sketches, requested a meeting. I sent back a polite decline and a gift box containing one of my designs, with a tag that read, "Sweetheart, this business isn't just about sketches." As for Gerald, prison stripes replaced his designer suits. His name became synonymous with betrayal, not brilliance. Every talk show, every article that once praised his vision, now dissected his fall from grace. He went from mogul to meme. And me, I didn't just reclaim a company. I restored a legacy. And I redefined what power looks like when it comes from pain, not privilege. Because in the end, I didn't just want revenge. I wanted respect. And now they call me by the name they once tried to bury Celia Marks. CEO, heir, architect of her own empire. Today, I wake up without weight on my chest. No courtroom dates, no headlines, no ghosts whispering, "Prove yourself." I still run Maison Iris, but not from a place of vengeance. From vision, from love, from the quiet knowledge that I'm no longer chasing anyone's approval, not even my mother's. For the first time, I understand the true meaning of power. It's not in control, it's in knowing who you are and refusing to shrink. They called me ungrateful, emotional, too young, too loud. But I know now those weren't flaws. They were warnings to people afraid of a woman with boundaries. I set mine. I honored them. And in doing so, I found not just success, but peace. So, if you've ever been made to feel small, unseen, or replaceable, listen closely. You are not broken. You are becoming. And when you decide to rise, don't look back for permission. The only approval you need is your own. If this story spoke to you, share your voice in the comments. Subscribe for more true stories of healing power and poetic justice. Your story matters because you matter.